Okay.
Welcome to another installment of 5. We are here with Barack, and we're going to read 4, maybe 5 chapters if we egg him on enough. And Barack, take it away. Thank you.
I like this little behind the shoulder thing. All right, so we're gonna use the charade system again, which means I'm gonna be reading through with something like a 5-second pause. What's happening?
Look at the camera when you talk.
Oh, at the camera. So that if somebody does have something they want to say or do, just stop me. People in front of me can just do that. People on Zoom might want to say something. We're going to read at least 4 chapters. If you egg me on, as Dan just said, I haven't prepared to read a 5th. And other than that, I can tell you that we are going to be peeling many, many layers off the onion today. So this is going to be hopefully an exciting one for you. It's certainly an exciting one for me in many ways. I want to, there's a little announcement that I want to make, which is the book now has a new title.
Oh,
It's not just 5, it's 5, The Magic of Soul. So, and I think this particular reading will make it clear as to what that name makes sense. And other than that, we are, quick recap, we left our heroes as Garrett, Aiden, and Solace had just finished escaping from the prison and made it into that room where they got recruited originally by Brad from the Thieves Guild, who we already know is probably not Brad from the Thieves Guild. And they walked into that room and it's completely destroyed. We also discovered that Niall's mother is apparently alive through that little portrait that they've been carrying around and stole out of the office of the Pape, whose name is Albergino Fantenga. It's a bit of a reminder. And we are still in split party mode, right? So we have the 3 3 escapees and the 2 others. And let me just dive right into it then. Any questions? 3, 2, 1.
Can you spell the name of the title?
Oh, yes. So Act 2, Chapter 20, Reunion. What the hell happened here? Solace said. They had emerged at the spot that was previously covered by the incredibly plush built-in couch facing the docks. The couch itself was split in half, showing how it had been constructed to hide the opening. Art that used to cover the walls was smashed into pieces all over the floor. The rich velvet drapes were torn down, slashed, and shredded. The intricately patterned rug showed everywhere the sign of a mighty struggle, with multiple bloodstains. The great table was much worse for wear. Gashes were visible all across its surface, and it was singed badly in one corner. Aidan placed his hands over one of the gashes, tears streaming down his cheeks. He hurts. A lot, he whispered. Garrett tried the narrow door at the back of the room. It opened a little and stopped. Something stuck behind, he grunted. Aidan joined him, and the door moved a bit more. Garrett reached through the crack. Oof! He jerked his hand back. It was covered in blood. There's a body, he peeked through the narrow opening. Looks like it's some sort of closet. A closet? Solis asked. That's a weird place to put one. Yeah, Aidan examined the hinges. I can ask the door to come out of its frame. What do you think? He placed his hands on the frame and closed his eyes. After a few seconds, he tensed with the strain of holding up the now unsupported door. Done. You guys want to help? Garrett and Aidan slid the door sideways. A body flopped into the room. Garrett leaned over it. That's Brad's bodyguard. Right, or whatever Brad's real name was, Aidan said. I remember he stood by the wall when we had our meeting here. Solace, come check this out. Solace? He repeated, and both he and Garrett turned to look back at where Solace was standing. She was no longer there. They rushed over and Aidan pointed at the floor. Hatch is closed, which means she went back to the prison. What for? Garrett explained. No clue, Aidan pulled open the hatch and shouted into the tube. Solace, where are you going? After a couple of seconds, they heard a faint reply. Sorry, guys, I have to do this. Garrett scrambled quickly down the ladder. She's gone down into the prison, he said when he came back. I can't access the key on this end either. It's rotated back into the wall. Aidan shook his head in frustration. That's probably why she told me to leave it there. I will never understand the woman. We just escaped and she wants to go back? He gestured around the room. Plus, it looks like we were very lucky to even make it this far. For sure, Garrett giggled. Can you imagine coming out of the room if were people in it? Aidan stood up. You know what? Nothing we can do about it. Me, I'd rather get out of here. Should we try the main door? Garrett looked up at him. I don't know, Aidan. Clearly something bad happened here, and we know there's guild stuff all over the rest of this level. The guild doesn't take this shit lightly, and we are fugitives. Makes me a little nervous. Aidan nodded. Me too. I just don't see any other way out unless we break these windows, and that kind of ruckus is sure to attract plenty of attention. He thought for a moment. Let's at least finish checking out the closet. They went back for a more thorough examination. It was perhaps twice the size of a utility closet, extending behind it to the side of the door. Garrett stepped into the far end and looked at the floor. Oh, he jumped up. Aidan, there's a slit going right through the middle here. I think it's a trapdoor. Aidan said. Maybe it's an exit of some sort after all. I wonder how you open it. Can I have a look? Aidan stepped inside. He leaned down to inspect the bottom. Yeah, I can see it. Barely, but it's there. Yep, Garrett said, and his voice made Aidan turn his face towards him. I wonder what this does. Garrett was standing in the doorway, his hand near the lower hinge assembly. He pressed on something. The trapdoor snapped open and Aidan tumbled down head first. Garrett could hear a splash. Wait for me, he shouted. Aidan climbed onto the lower docks. Garrett, who had been clinging to his back, slid down and sat next to him. Sorry, Aidan, you did really good getting us out. I never really learned how to swim. I guess if you grow up in the shallows, it's a thing that like everybody does, huh? Will you, just for once, stop being so impulsive? Aidan barely contained his anger. Remember how you almost killed Solace? We had no idea what was under the floor back there. You could have killed me. Tiny as he was, Garrett still shrunk visibly and melted into the shadows. Aidan could barely see him at all. Okay, stop that. It gives me the creeps, he said in annoyance, and Garrett came back into view. I'm really sorry, Aidan. I didn't know how it worked, but we were lucky too, right? And you didn't die. Yes, we were, and no, I didn't, Aidan sighed. It's a clever setup. The water is just a couple of feet under the trapdoor, and that little area is completely shielded from view. I imagine they use it to smuggle things in and out of the shallows. Maybe even people, he paused. I'm too tired to think about it. Where should we go? Garrett asked. I don't feel like going back to the inn right now. Me neither, Aidan nodded. I suppose we could try and sneak our way out to the beach, but maybe a better option is the church. Romek's dad will happily host us with the rest of the homeless. Just don't mention any of this, all right? Better that he doesn't recognize us. Yes, sir, Garrett jumped to his feet and saluted. Let's go. Groaning, Aidan stood up. At least you smell better, he muttered, as they both made their way across the docks. At sunrise, they made their way towards the Steadfast Inn. Rajiv did recognize them and had kindly washed their clothes and dried them by the fire. They left him a few coins that Garrett pilfered off his prison guards, but they skipped his signature turnip soup. When they got to the inn, the bar was half full. Trina was there setting up a table. You're up early, she told Aidan. Hey, Trina. Yeah, good morning, Aidan responded. Trina smiled. Your friends should be down in just a moment, she said. Wait, what? Your friends? You're here to see them, right? I got Nael the audience she asked for. Audience? Aidan looked at Garrett in surprise. Is Lomek here too? Why don't you ask him yourself when he comes down? Trina went back to the kitchen. Aidan, Garrett! Nael rushed down the stairs. They hugged and then Nael stepped back. It's so good to see you. We thought you were stuck in prison, but here you are, alive and well. Where's Solace? She asked. It's a long story, Aidan sighed. Where's Lomek? He's not feeling well, a strange delirium. He's been having these terrible dreams. He was fine last night, especially after he felt Solace again. Aidan raised an eyebrow at that. But now he seems stuck in a nightmare. I couldn't wake him up. Speaking of which, where is Solace? She came up with us, but just as we were about to head out, she ran back into the prison and locked us out of it, Aidan said, and preemptively added as Nael opened her mouth. We have no idea either. We couldn't wait around. Trina brought up 2 more sets of plates and cups. I got your interview, young woman, she winked at Nael, but he is speaking to some important lady from the upper shelves right now. She was sitting in the dark waiting when I came down to open this morning. I overheard them shouting at each other earlier, but don't worry, you're next. In the meantime, why don't you all have something to eat? Is Lomic coming down too? Aidan looked dazed. Another world? A metal called steel? And what did you call them? Nuts and bolts? Lomic's nanny is the king's pope? What in the name of the gods have we gotten ourselves into? Not to mention the 2 gold bars as a reward for that thing I found, Garrett laughed. I guess almost losing a finger was worth it after all. Nael smiled. Sure seems that way. She placed a bunch of gold coins and the remaining bar on the table, and Garrett squealed in delight. Anyway, Aidan, I also have a big surprise for you. Are you ready? Wait, another surprise? Aidan placed his hand over his chest dramatically, then added, my heart can take it. Huh, Nael said, but I'm being serious. I kind of skipped the trip back from the city. Lomic and I, we ran into a werewolf. Aidan sat bolt upright. A werewolf? For real? But how are you still alive? Instead of answering, Nael reached inside her leather tunic and carefully pulled out a folded piece of cloth. She handed it to Aidan. Whatever it is, it saved our lives. With a look of confusion, Aidan unwrapped the small package. In it was a small, dull, silver-covered necklace with a tiny pendant shaped like the heads of 3 animals. His eyes grew wide. Is this what I think it is? He gasped. Lomic and I believe so, yes, Nael said quietly. What is it? Garrett demanded, standing up on his chair and trying to grab it out of Aidan's hand, who held it back. A talisman, Aidan said, then took a deep breath. An actual goddamn talisman. A magical prison with sliding doors, a talking rat, an aquarium? What in the name of the gods have we gotten ourselves into? Nael said teasingly as Aidan finished telling their story. Aidan smiled at her. Don't forget the self-cleaning sewers, he said. Garrett really likes those, he grinned. Garrett stuck his tongue out at him. I'll go see Hallie later and we'll work out how to get you on shelf 2 so you can find your mom. I'm not sure what the rules are for escaped prisoners. I don't think they've ever really thought about it, he grinned. So I probably shouldn't try to do it myself, but my sister should be able to take you with her when she goes home. Good idea, Garrett, Aidan turned to Nael. I'm still confused. So you're saying your real dad was the library guy and your mom's alive? And she's married to the racist prick we robbed? What did you say his name was? The pothead? Albergino Frentenga. Yes, it seems that way, Nael said. I still find it hard to believe. I mean, she's always been a bit detached in a way, but also very loving. Kind of a free spirit, actually. It just doesn't make any sense. Well, I don't mean it in a bad way, but how well do you really know her? Aidan asked cautiously. Well enough to know that she isn't a racist, Nael snapped. She's been around a long time, and she never told me much about her youth. She said she was in some wars a long time ago, and that she traveled all over the world. But many elves do that at some point, because we, here she paused for a moment, well, they can. Aidan squeezed her hand. At least you know you're not sick, he said. Just a half-breed, Garrett chuckled. Nael glared at him. So what now? Aidan pushed his plate away. Right now, I'm waiting to speak to Bavin, Nael said. What you said about the room being demolished explains a lot. Like, that's probably why he's blocked access to that area. But I'm hoping that maybe he can tell us where we can find Brad, or whatever his name is. Yeah, I know Bavin too. My dad and I used to supply fresh game for his kitchen, Aidan said. We saw him a few times when we brought in more exotic stuff. I stopped doing it after my parents died, but I'm pretty sure he'll remember me. Maybe I'll join you? Sure, Nael said. No, you'll stay out here, she added quickly towards Garrett, who looked disappointed. Suddenly, a commotion could be heard from behind the bar's back door, the muffled sounds of people shouting at each other. Trina hurried out from the kitchen and went through the back door. After a few moments, she returned and said, he should be done soon, before heading back into the kitchen. They looked at each other, wondering what was going on. A couple more minutes passed in silence. They heard the faint sound of a door slamming. Then the back door swung open and a tall, hooded figure emerged from it, striding purposefully and powerfully past them while paying them no heed. Nael gasped and covered her mouth, as if she had seen a ghost. Aidan and Garrett looked at her in concern. She moved her lips silently. Are you all right? Aidan asked. As the figure reached the saloon doors, Nael stood shakily up on her feet. Mom? She whispered. Then she straightened and shouted, Mom! The figure stopped cold. Mom, Nael shouted again, tears streaming down her face. She rushed out, her chair falling. Mom! The tall figure turned, removing the hood to reveal an elven woman. Aidan and Garrett was struck by her stunning features. Her face was like a goddess with slanted, green, piercing eyes that spoke of an age and wisdom utterly belied by an almost childlike appearance. As Nael ran towards her, the elven woman opened her arms in recognition, and the two of them came together in a long, warm embrace. Nael dug her face into her mother's shoulders, sobbing heavily, and she held Nael tightly and kissed her head. "You're still alive," her mother said after Nael had calmed down. "I looked for you for so long, but could never find even a trace of you." "I thought you died in the fire," Nael blurted and started sobbing again. "I couldn't find you or Dad. Everything was burned to the ground. I ran away." "Dad? Oh, you mean yours?" her mother asked. "No, Mom, Dad, my dad. Yours was my father," Nael shouted. "I found his journal." Trina spoke softly behind Aidan and Garrett. "So he's ready to see her now. Should I let him know it's no longer necessary?"
Yeah.
Got it. Act 2, Chapter 21, Revelations 4:3. Interlude, Lomec's hellscape. Lomax sleeps, or at least he thinks he does. It's hard to sleep when he feels so much. He sees Solace, who stands nearby, smiling at him. He holds his yearning arms out to her, but she's just out of reach. He tries to step closer, but finds that he cannot move. Looking down, he discovers that his legs are trapped in the sand. They're on a beach. He's sinking slowly. He looks back up to Solace, pleading for help. She doesn't respond, and her smile only widens as she watches him. "Help me, Solace," he cries, but she stays silent. He sees that her arms are crossed and she appears relaxed, perhaps even happy. Happy that he is going to drown. "Solace?" he asks. Her eyes are so cold. His heart beats faster and he realizes that what he feels is not passion, not desire, it is fear. Fear and hatred towards her for dooming him to this. It is her fault that he is sinking in the sand. He knows it now. How had he missed it before? Staring at her, unable to move, his hatred turns into something more, a white-hot rage like he had never experienced, never knew existed, never knew could exist. She stops smiling and her loathing eyes are now looking straight into him. It enrages him further. He growls involuntarily as his muscles tighten, and then he feels it. His feet are coming unstuck. She hadn't noticed. Once he's free, everything happens quickly. Somewhere inside of him, he knows it's wrong, but his anger is overwhelming. He can't stop himself from lunging at her with all his might, his hands locking around her fragile neck. He finds himself wishing that she would say something, maybe that she's sorry, or perhaps plead for her life, but she doesn't struggle. Her wide open eyes bore into his soul as her life drains away. He can feel her neck breaking under his powerful grip. Time passes. Her body grows stiff in his hands. The rage dissipates and is replaced by sorrow. "What have I done?" he screams. A grief deeper than the bottom of the ocean washes over Lomek as he looks upon her beautiful, silent body. His fingers are still locked around her neck. He must atone. All he needs is simply to let the sands take him. Dropping her body, he steps back into the pit that trapped him. Perhaps to die. Preparing to die, he raises his face in a silent farewell. He sees Solace, who stands nearby, smiling at him. "Sorry we took so long, you guys. We had a bit of catching up to do." Nael walked into the room. "I would like you to meet my mother, Enrielle." Enrielle followed her inside. Garrett jumped up from the chair and extended his hand. "I'm Garrett," he beamed, "and this is Aidan, but he's a sourpuss." Aidan shook his head as he smiled. "Yes, Nael told me about you," Enrielle said, "and presumably this is Lomek?" As if in response, Lomek moaned in his sleep. "What is wrong with him?" she asked. We don't know, Mom. He was fine when he went to sleep, but he's been having strange dreams recently, and he hasn't woken up since last night. He moans like this every hour or so," Nael said. Enrielle sat down. "Let's hope he wakes up at some point. Where's the last one? Solace, right?" "How much did you tell her, Nael?" Aidan asked. "Just the basics," Nael responded, "but she knows about the prison. Well, she already knew about the prison." "Right. So Solace went back into the prison," Aidan said. "Garrett and I were with her, but she took us by surprise. She disabled the lock so no one could follow her." He raised his palms. "We really have no clue why she'd want to do that." "Why indeed?" Enrielle responded calmly. "So I suppose you are aware that from the perspective of the Thieves Guild, you're fugitives, right?" She gestured at Nael. "Even you, Nai, because you're helping them." Nael blushed at the use of her childhood nickname. "Is it true that you're married to Popade?" she asked as she sat down. Then she added hopefully, I told him that it couldn't be. Yes, it's true, honey, Henrielle responded. But how could you? He had this horrible book in his study, and it looked like he was writing it. Nael looked crestfallen. Well, it's a marriage of convenience. Humans don't live very long, Henrielle said casually. The truth is, Gino wasn't always like this, but he started changing a little while ago. I suspect that he tried to do something that he really shouldn't have, and the experience has been slowly poisoning his mind. So are you in the Pope's organization too? Garrett asked. Lomac's dad runs the church here in the Shallows. Oh, no, dear, not at all, Henrielle turned to him. I work with the Thieves Guild. Solis went to the storeroom first. As she anticipated, there was more than enough food in there, in ideal conditions for preservation. She never needed much to sustain her when she worked with magic. Somehow, in a way that she could never quite explain satisfactorily, the magic itself seemed to provide nourishment. But she never had access to much magic. In this strange place, it was everywhere. It permeated the pumice. With every step she took, she could feel it in her toes, the arches of her feet, and flowing up to her ankles. Her mind was in a constant state of controlled ecstasy as her fingers found themselves moving continuously, searching for patterns in the abundance surrounding her. Every breath she took meant another delicious whiff of the smell that had become her obsession since she first experienced the shockwave as a frightened child. No better place for her to be, no better place for her to die. She closed her eyes and relaxed, allowing for as much time as she needed to adjust. Then she let her senses guide her. Keeping her eyes closed, she moved slowly, realizing that she could see without looking. She climbed over the two dead guards, noting dispassionately that the smell of her cold fire darts had dissipated. Without stumbling, she climbed down into the tunnel leading into the prison, finding the rungs easily, as if she had been going through it her entire life. Her magical blind vision was crystal clear. And like a tall, blonde, and determined magic magnet, she was headed towards its source. Aidan and Garrett jumped out of their chairs, the former reaching for a dagger, the latter heading towards the window. Henrielle laughed. Don't worry, boys, I'm not interested in getting you arrested. You should know that these tribunals are usually arranged to make a political point or score a political favor, not to seek justice. Once a point is made or the favor is scored, nobody cares much anymore. Most people don't even know the prison exists, but even amongst those that do, few realize that most prisoners come out alive. It's just a matter of whether someone is willing to pay for them. She smiled. It's not money that's needed to secure this kind of release. The two relieved fugitives came carefully back to the table. But we saw the torture chamber, Aidan said. Right, Henrielle nodded. It's very impressive, isn't it? Tends to change the minds of even the most stubborn of people. If someone they care about is in a cell nearby. She paused. Anyway, right now there are much bigger issues the guild is dealing with. So while your escape will be noted, since nobody's escaped the prison before, Aidan and Garrett exchanged a meaningful look at that, dealing with it won't be considered high priority. You have at least a couple of days to leave town. Mom, I don't think we want to leave, Nael said. Wait, why not? Henrielle sounded surprised. Well, we need to find out what happened to Solis, for one thing. Also, Lomac's in no shape to travel. Like, he won't wake up. And he has a strange connection to her, so if we take him away, he might get worse or even die. Can't you drop him off with his father? I suppose so, but Nael paused, struggling with her emotions. Mom, I really care about him, she finally said. Everyone looked at her in surprise, and Henrielle smiled. Oh, the vagaries of youth, she exclaimed. I was like you once, but you know, honey, we live longer than anybody else, by a lot. Oh, what am I saying? I know full well there's nothing I can say to change the way you feel. Aidan looked at Nael, who nodded. Turning back to Henrielle, he said, well, there's the talisman we found. Maybe you can help us find someone who can tell what it is, what he does. Henrielle looked forward. Can I see it? Somewhat reluctantly, Aidan reached under his leather vest and carefully took off the talisman. Holding his palm out towards Henrielle, he slowly opened his fist. The talisman was pulsating faintly, slowly. Henrielle gasped and reached out. Where did you find this? She blurted. As her fingers neared it, the talisman jumped into her hand, its pulse fading as soon as she held it. It saved our lives, Nael said, in Corantha. A werewolf came after us. Mom, what's going on? Henrielle, who had settled back in her chair, her eyes closed in deep concentration, suddenly opened them. She rose slowly out of her chair and came around the table, kneeling beside Aidan, looking intently into his face. He looked back at her in surprise, but stayed still, his hands resting on the table. Henrielle touched his hand, tears filling her eyes. "Nylian," she whispered. "But how are you still alive? How is this possible?" she said softly. Then, moving so swiftly that no one had a chance to react, she hugged an extremely confused Aidan tightly and exclaimed, "My son!" When Solace emerged from the bottom of the tube, Carrot was there, apparently in anticipation of her arrival. He waited for her to step off the table. "You're back, huh? I knew we were kindred spirits. It's really interesting down here, so much to research." He grinned, and his rat's teeth gleaming in the dim light. "Yes, very much so," Solace said, then started walking down the hallway. Carrot ran after her. "So what are we doing?" he asked. She didn't answer, as she took a few more long strides before stopping in front of the torture chamber. "I am going in here," she said, and walked into it. Interesting, Carrot thought to himself. Very interesting. Finally, Henrielle let Aidan go and sat back on her knees, tears covering her cheeks. Nael held her hand to her mouth. Aidan sat stunned and motionless. Henrielle's finger traced his scar gently, and she slowly stood up to her feet. "I thought you died at birth," she murmured. "But, Mom, I don't understand," Nael blurted. "Nai, on one of my trips, I slept with a wild elf. I didn't realize that I was fertile at the time. I was looking for this." She held up the talisman, which had reacquired its usual dull color. "Anyway, I gave birth to," she squeezed Aidan's hand, "Nylian, in a clearing." "That's the story you told me about my father," Nael murmured. Aidan pulled out of his chair and stepped back. "First of all, my name's Aidan. Second, my parents were Fergus and Isla of the Shallows." His voice broke at that, but then he continued. "And finally, I don't understand any of this at all, and I sure as hell don't like it." Henrielle looked at him for a long moment. "Those are human names, aren't they?" she asked. "You know they weren't your real parents. Maybe not when you were younger, but now?" Aidan did not respond. "You're what now?" She stopped for a moment doing mental arithmetic. "Is it 57 or 58? Aidan nodded slowly. "How would I know that?" Aidan's shoulders started walking slightly as his eyes got wet. "But then why did you leave me for dead?" he yelled. "Because I was heavily injured and I didn't think this would be powerful enough to save both of us." She held up the talisman. "The fellow who made it was a bit of a jokester, and for whatever reason, the talisman didn't seem inclined to give me sufficient protection at that moment." She took a deep breath. "I had to make a choice." "What are you talking about?" Aidan demanded. "I was cornered by a werewolf right when I gave birth to you. Very unlucky, but the werewolf would have surely killed both of us. I was already on the verge of dying from a badly infected wound I had taken from a diseased goblin, so I had to leave you behind," she said calmly, having regained her composure. "But before I left, I placed this on your chest. It seems like the protection it declined to provide me was sufficient to keep you alive. I guess your parents, Fergus and Isla, you said? I guess they found you in time to save you and raise you." "Wait, so you're like brother and sister?" Garrett exclaimed as he looked back and forth between Nael and Aidan. "Could this guy get any better?" Having examined the instruments of torture thoroughly, Solace began carefully inspecting the walls of the cave. "What are you looking for?" Carrot, who had followed her inside, asked. "A passage," Solace said over her shoulders. "A passage to where?" he pressed. Solace stopped. "Look, rat, or talking root vegetable, or whatever you are, I appreciate your help in getting us out of here. I truly do. But right now, I need to find something, and I need to find it badly, and I don't think you can be of use," she said before resuming her search. "Well, I suppose you're right," Carrot said. "Still, if you're trying to figure out how to get to the big stopper, then maybe I can help." Solace froze, then stared at Carrot in suspicion. He was licking his paws. "What do you mean you can help? How?" she asked. "See, I've been around here for a while," Carrot responded, "and I've sort of gone down every little nook and cranny. This place is very interesting. So full of magic, isn't it?" he said teasingly. Solace dropped to the floor and lowered her head to look straight at the seated rat. "What could you know of magic?" she demanded. "Oh, I just know about it, not feel it like you can. But like I said before, I do think the source of it is the stopper, and I think that's what you're looking for. Am I right?" Solace glared at him. Well, I only caught a tiny glimpse of it once and almost died because I'm just a little rat. But there is a way you can get down there if you want, he said. And that way is? Solis asked quietly. Through there, Carrot pointed towards the big Iron Maiden. But you'll have to put yourself inside and close it, and there's a trick to it. A trick? Yes, you have to shift your weight in a peculiar way, and then instead of getting impaled, you fall through a trapdoor. And it's underwater. And I also think she used some kind of magic. Who used magic? The last girl who did it, maybe 20 years ago. But, Carrot licked his paw again, she never made it back. And how do you know all this? Solis asked as she stood up. I fell asleep in the device and she entered it unexpectedly, Carrot answered. After a moment, he added, oh, and also, yes, Solis looked back at him. The girl, well, I suppose she was an important wizard or something. She also caused the volcano to erupt. There you go. Do we need the short stop or?
Yeah. Gotta get some water. Yeah. And some more wine. Yeah. No, bring it on.
Lots of connective tissue now.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, that was a
very
biggie.
interesting.
Just wait for the next one.
So she knew that he was her son because of the talisman that she left there with him.
Yes,
when she
correct.
had to abandon him.
Yeah, so the werewolf chapter was actually unreal,
Yes.
This is actually.
which resolves one of the big questions. We know that Lomek was child, and we know that Enriel was the woman in werewolf, and that's Aidan.
Yes.
And the fact that child comes before Lomek in those chapters, and werewolf comes before Aidan, perhaps hints at the arrangement of those chapters.
Oh, yeah, that was more than an onion peel.
Yes.
Oh, wait, we're just starting.
Well, no, that I wouldn't put that in onion peel. I would put that in Revelation.
Hmm. Well, the name of the chapter is
Yeah.
Revelations. 4:3.
Aptly named.
Right. Act 2, chapter 22, a degree of social science. The weight of recent revelations and being on the lam injected a measure of urgency into their deliberations. Thankfully, Enriel seemed comfortable stepping into a leadership role and provided a calming voice. Aidan and Nael marveled at the newly discovered familial bond and were impressed by their mother's efficient command. For his part, Garrett was delighted to be along for the ride. He did little to contain his enthusiasm at the prospect of even more exciting discoveries. They moved Lomek under the care of his father and waited until Rajiv finished examining his son. He told them that, while Lomek appeared stuck in a nightmare, his life was not in danger, as long as whomever it was on the other side of the psychic link stayed alive. It could only be Solace, they explained, and then they had to fill him in. That required Aidan and Nael to discuss in detail what they had witnessed and what Lomek had shared with them about his dreams and how he felt Solace like a ghostling. Rajiv couldn't make sense of it, but to Enriel, the notion of intertwined souls sounded familiar, which is how, for the first time in centuries, any living soul in Lavatown heard the true story of its founding. A history lesson. You've all heard of Kenzer Kelstra, the founder of Lavatown, Enriel started. They murmured their assent. Well, he wasn't the only founder. Few are aware of the truth today, but he had a partner and co-founder. Here, she looked meaningfully at Nael. His name was Zacharias. What? Nael exclaimed. The great bard? He founded Lavatown? Enriel nodded. They did it together, she said. How do you know? Nael demanded. Because I was there, Enriel answered, a hint of a smile on her face. Nael opened and shut her mouth several times. Finally, she spoke. You knew him in real life? But when I told you, yes, I did know him. I knew him very well, actually. I'm sorry, Nainai, but this is ancient history, and there were a lot of complications that you wouldn't have understood. I just decided it's best to let you pursue your own path. Mom, how could you? Nael looked betrayed. Aidan squeezed her hand. Let her tell it to us now, he said quietly. Enriel resumed the story. When I met them, Kenzer and Zacharias were already successful adventurers. They had spent years exploring the equator and the southern lands beyond, and were putting together a company to go deeper into a remote area they referred to as the underground continent. I was about your age now, Nai, but even though they had plenty of brilliant and much more experienced volunteers to pick from, they chose me as one of the few to go with them. We spent several years in that place, and I doubt that we saw a quarter of it. What was that place exactly? Rajiv asked. I'd never heard of it. They told us that it was a huge realm that is buried deep under the surface of the world. It is full of monsters and wonders, and the kinds of which are not found on Koranta. It is also extremely dangerous. Merely to enter it, you must travel down a volcano that is active, and only during a very limited time when it is cooling off following an eruption. How does one do that without dying? Ah, you've all heard of Kenzo, the great general. He was that, but he was also something that has been forgotten to history, a great magician. And not a wizard either. He was a wild mage like your Solace, and albeit an extremely powerful one. In fact, by the time we emerged from that realm, he had likely become the most powerful wielder of magic in the entire world. He got us in and out safely. The dozen of us who survived that trip became formidable in our own right. We were battle-hardened, magic-tested, and boneheaded. We felt like nothing could stop us. The incredible riches we brought back mattered none, because nothing could compare to the thrill of adventuring under the leadership of those two. But where could we go next? And so it was that, in consultation with all of us, they decided to venture into the dark spot. The dark spot? Aidan asked. Yes, it was a place in Koranta that nobody had ever succeeded in entering, even though some had tried. Today, you know it as Lava Town, Enriel smiled. Back then, it was completely inaccessible. The stone storms that mark its border today were bigger and in constant motion then, and surrounded the entire peninsula. And if you somehow managed to survive crossing that and set foot on the other side, the whole place was covered in an impenetrable, dense cloud that would burn the flesh of any living being in seconds. The king of Koranta at the time, Anberg, formed the magic corps with the specific purpose of figuring out the secret of the dark spot. Most of the corps died while attempting unsuccessfully to find a solution. Enriel took a sip of water before continuing. We had a royal wizard in our company. He had decided to leave the school and seek adventure instead of joining the corps, whose mission he perceived as futile. His name was Talus. And if you've ever heard of any of the silly stories about how some wizard enchanted the floor of the council to make it float, well, it was Talus, and the enchantment is nothing like what you'd heard. That's funny, Garrett said. I've heard him called so many names, but never Talus. Enriel nodded. Yes, and he was perfectly happy with that being the case. In fact, he was the one who seeded the name Xander as part of the false narrative that is still being told today, centuries later. So what did he actually do to the floor of the council? Garrett asked. I'll get to that, I promise, Enriel responded, then resumed her narrative. Zacharias was a form of wild mage as well. Nael was plainly shocked at hearing this. Yes, Nael, he was a terrific bard, but that was just his occupation. He was in reality a soul mage, a unique kind of wild mage whose power is derived from their ability to manipulate sound in a certain highly unusual way. Souls have a special resonance, and soul mages can tune to it, and through that resonance, interact directly with souls across all planes of existence. I've never heard of soul mages, Rajiv said. In the 6th century since then, I knew of only one more that had existed for sure. He served King Emeka, but died in the underground realm. Surely there have been others, but I've not heard of them. Still, I suspected another one may be alive today. Do you know who they are? Rajiv inquired. Well, yes, she's sitting in this very room, Enriel responded casually. Nael blinked as the realization hit her. What are you saying, Mom? Your path, your discoveries, and your experiences all seem to point to it. I heard much from Zacharias while he was alive about the way he grew into his power. It was similar, Enriel said. Do you see now why I couldn't tell you about it? He was very clear that he needed to realize his talent on his own in trying circumstances, like your encounter with the werewolf. The way he explained it to me, he only truly understood that he could interact with souls after learning every other sound first, even the quietest ones. That was when he realized that souls sounded different than anything else in the world. Nael stayed silent, her mind working for the second time in as many days to rearrange her understanding of the world. She thought about how she could shape and reshape sound to suit different people when she sang. The strange symbols in Zacharias' book that had puzzled her for so long came into sharp focus, and for the first time, they made sense. Enriel continued. Zach and Kay worked together to figure out how to get into the peninsula without dying. Kenza was the one who grasped the nature and severity of the divine guards, but it was Zach, the soul mage, who understood what they were there for. He didn't know what it meant exactly, not until right before he died many years later.
But his intuition proved correct, that the stones and the flesh-burning fog and the rest of the wards were a protective divine barrier around powerful souls who were suspended on this plane, rather than a gate to keep others out. That part was just a convenient side effect. Initially, he thought it was a prison, but later he called it a soul crib, which I always thought was a really neat way of putting it. Suspended souls? Aidan asked. Indeed, suspended here by a god. With their insights, Kay and Zach managed to make it all the way here to the volcano and discover the unusual crystal buried inside of it. And Riel took another sip of water as everyone leaned forward. Back then, there was no lava town, only the volcano. And deep underneath the surface of the water, they found this huge rock that shouldn't have been there. It was set on top of the mountain's enormous magma chamber, as if it were a bottle cap. Kenzer said it was a necessary placement due to the energy involved. Only a huge volcano like this one could contain it. The rock was a bit too large, which is the reason that the gash exists. The gods slammed it down while tearing apart the mountainside in order for the rock, which was really a massive six-sided crystal, to fit. The crystal itself was unlike anything they had ever seen. The way Kenzer described it to me, it was as if it was made of pure magic, and the energy contained within it must have been equal to that of the sun. Still is, I guess. Why would Kenzer, or Zacharias for that matter, tell you all this? Nael asked suddenly. What were you to them? I was his lover, Enriel smiled, and Zach's. They were so remarkable that they decided that, since they loved me equally, they would share me. There was never any acrimony. I was glad for that because I loved them both equally as well. She paused to reflect. The two of them experimented with the crystal. They were very careful and methodical, as they always were. I don't know exactly what happened, but one day they showed up in our tent and showed me Kenzer's dagger. It used to be iron, finely crafted for sure, the best money could buy, but it had been transformed into something else, something new. The metal was unlike anything I'd ever seen, but it improved the dagger so much that in the hands of any in our small group, a dagger like this made us far more dangerous. Steel, Nael whispered. Yes, I believe that's what it's called. How do you know that? Enriel asked in surprise. When no answer came, she continued. They reforged all our weapons into steel. Then they built the original Shallows docks and made the first trip east to the Sentia, coming back with fruits and spices that nobody in Corunta had ever enjoyed before. Crossing the big chasm, folks didn't start calling it the spasm until much later, where it was extremely dangerous back then. And after a couple of such trips, they agreed with the king to build Stormbridge. He provided the services of his engineers and the remainder of his magic corps, and they brought them in the materials. The stone was carved out of the mountainside while also building Lava Town, and the rest was brought back with us from the underground realm. Even with all these resources, it took over 2 years to build because of the storms, which Kenzer never managed to quiet down completely. It must have been incredible to watch it being built, Garrett whistled. It was. It also made Lava Town just as incredible in terms of its trade potential, Enriel smiled. So as soon as it was finished, King Anberg brought an army to take it over. So what happened then? Garrett asked breathlessly. Surely the king won. He would have, except that we had steel weapons. That and the bridge being under our control when the battle started served to greatly even the odds. Most importantly, we were led by Kenzer. Magical notwithstanding, wizards cannot engage in offensive magic like a wild mage can. And Kayan had Zach by his side, a soul mage so powerful he could speak to many souls at once. The king's army found itself fiercely resisted and rapidly demoralized, in such a way that even though they outnumbered us almost 100 to 1, well, we scared the hell out of them. By the time it ended, we had only lost the least experienced member of our group. Was that the Battle of Stormbridge? Aidan asked. Yes, Enriel nodded. After that, Kay and Zach established Lava Town as an independent city. They put together the council, except for the Grunt. That role was added a few centuries later. They started the Thieves Guild as a way of making sure they stayed on top of everything that was happening throughout Lava Town. They also put up the shelves, which brings us back to Talus and his enchantments. Enriel turned towards Garrett. He did something that highly trained wizards do very well. He masked the steel supports that Kenzer and Zach created to hold up the shelves with a permanent illusion, so believable that by now, nobody believes they aren't made of stone. She grinned. Turns out that steel is both created and repelled by the crystal. So I suppose that in a way, the shelves do float, just not how anybody believes they do. How do you think the ships fly? Garrett jumped out of his chair. I knew it, he yelled in excitement. I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. It's all made up rituals, isn't it? The way it actually works has nothing to do with them. Yes, Enriel nodded. Did you figure this out on your own? You're very clever. Of course, nobody will believe you. The Maritime Guild was founded around a set of interlocking, complex rituals, so elaborate and exacting, starting at the moment of a maritime officer's birth, that they really do believe they are performing a specialized invocation that requires the right bloodline and extreme training and discipline. The truth is much simpler. It involves permanent dampening magic being temporarily suppressed with a code phrase to allow the steel in one of those boxes to carry with it a ship up the elevator. I was with K and Z when they came up with this stuff. Oh, that was a fun night. She smiled. Anyway, Talus implemented all the necessary magic after they dreamed up the idea. He was a real genius. Oh, he also made several talismans, including this one. She placed a talisman on the table. I don't get it, Aiden said. How did they come up with this stuff? It's pretty complicated. Yes, it is. They took me down to see the crystal afterwards, but when they were first experimenting on it, Kenzer accidentally traveled in spirit to another world, which he called Earth, and is supposedly hanging energetically in some fashion off the edge of the crystal. It was way beyond me, but apparently Earth is where he picked up these notions. For example, the nuts and bolts which inspired the creation of the shelf supports. Another was the term Pope, which I think that in that other world was the way they talked about certain unpopular religious leaders. Kenzer hated religion, especially as King Anberg was relying so heavily on it for his power. And so when he came back, he started calling Anberg the Pope in contempt. And it sort of went on from there and morphed over time into its present meaning. Traveled in spirit, like a ghost? Aiden asked. Something like that. Maybe he was just hallucinating, but it gave him so many ideas. His power grew exponentially and his energy, which was abundant before then, became manic. Luckily, he had Zach to support him and eventually meld with him when they ascended. Enriel looked patiently at the shocked faces around the table. After a few seconds, Nael finally spoke in a dazed tone. Ascended? As in became a god? Why, yes, honey, a god. Kenzer was by then powerful enough to ascend, but as he confessed to me the last time we slept with each other, it turns out that you can't do it on your own. That's the awesome ultimate power that the soul mage has in their possession. The power to guide a soul with a purpose like this to find the way to its final impossible destination. Alas, it will consume the soul mage in the process. The way I understand it is because to serve as a soul guide means to merge with the guided. Zach's willing, loving, and ultimate sacrifice allowed his soul to meld with Kenzer's at the moment of Kenzer's departure while he undertook the ritual of ascension. And so Kenzer, accompanied forever by Zach as his loyal lieutenant, joined with the rest of the gods. She paused for a second, sat back in her chair, and crossed her hands in her lap. I think you're quite familiar with him, she concluded. You know him as Thor.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
My favorite character, Nael, is the sound thing,
Soul
the
mage.
soul thing.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit more about what that means?
She can speak to souls. That's what we know now. That her special power with sound is actually a trait that is part of her having this capacity to talk directly to souls.
Zachariah was her dad?
I did not say that.
I thought you did.
No, I said Zacharias was the lover of her mother.
Yeah, but he had the same
Yours was her dad, the
Oh.
library guy.
power. Okay.
Right.
And her mom's name is
Enriel.
Enriel. She's older than Lava Town.
She's older than Lavatown, correct? She's about 700 years old.
All right, yeah. She's damn old.
I mean, elf, right? Sort of middle-aged elf. And she's also the one that, was in the werewolf story, and she's the, right? Anything else? Any other complications you would like me to unravel before we move on? Because there's another big whopper coming through.
Oh, wonderful.
I promised you we're gonna peel the goddamn onion, didn't I?
Yeah, but the way it's happening, it makes more questions.
Does it?
Yeah, well, like what I just asked,
In
those
some
kinds of
ways, yeah.
things. Those kinds of things,
But it's
kind
also
of clarification questions.
It certainly presents you complications.
Kind of like what you said about the fifth chapter, which is, you have a feeling of what's coming next, so you hurry up and read it.
Act 2, Chapter 23. Innocent bystanders. Solace took a deep breath and held it as she invoked an air bubble to surround her head and shoulders. It would be enough to last her an hour if she stayed calm. Carrot said something, but his voice was suppressed by the magic of the bubble. She couldn't even project her hearing. Sensing her confusion, Carrot ran into the Iron Maiden and after making sure she was watching him, pointed to several spots along its internal perimeter. Then he scampered out. Solace stepped inside the device. She twisted herself until she fit, then flattened as far away from the hinges as possible and put pressure on the areas that Carrot had highlighted. Here goes, she murmured and nodded at Carrot. He moved outside her field of view. A few seconds later, the Iron Maiden started closing. She could feel the spikes touching her skin and wondered if she got it wrong and would end up being the first person to actually die in what she had come to realize was mostly for show. Then the flow gave way. Ready to go? Henrielle asked the three of them. Yes, Aidan said. He turned to Rajiv, who was sitting by Lormek's bed. Sir, I just wanted to say thank you. Rajiv smiled at him. Deep signs of worry were etched on his face. They left the little church and climbed onto Human Ridge and then Trade Bay. They mingled with many people carrying boxes of goods up from the Shallows docks to be sent to Coranta. When they arrived, Henrielle booked them onto a front-runner caravan that was set to leave shortly. The clerk recognized her and was sufficiently awed in the presence of such an important family figure that she didn't question the presence of the other three. Your friends will have to ride in the back with the boxes, ma'am, she apologized, looking downwards and shuffling her feet. Our wagons are so full of travelers these days. Henrielle placed a reassuring hand on her shoulders. That means the business is booming, and that's a good thing. You're doing well, she said to her. Will you let the captain know that we should like to keep it to ourselves at night, she added, and the clerk ran away, visibly relieved. Henrielle turned to them. Get yourselves comfortable. I have to get something. I'll be back shortly. They won't leave without me, she left hurriedly. They reflected on the last time they headed out this way. It felt like it happened in another life. Soon, they were on their way again. Solace took a moment to reorient. She was in another tube, except this one was fully submerged. She could feel herself passing through a magical threshold as she fell down. She guessed that it primarily served to keep the water from rising above the level of the prison floor, but sensed that there was more to it. She stored the mystery in her mind for later. As the hatch closed softly, the tube darkened. She was ready to invoke a light, but something made her stop. Solace waited to let her eyes adjust. A dim aura of magic color was coming from below. Her heart beat faster. She swam. The tube took several turns, following a path that she decided was like a vein inside the volcano. The water was warm, and she wondered how it hadn't all evaporated. She made one final turn and could see where the tube ended. Magic shone within the last stretch of tunnel in mesmerizing fashion, its yellowish and blue tints painting the rock into a kaleidoscope of color. It was the most beautiful sight she'd ever seen. She inhaled deeply and then screamed in frustration. Her protective air bubble was keeping her alive, but it was also keeping her from smelling the magic that was surrounding her with such abundance. Everything all right, Nael? Aidan inquired. The wagon was rocking slightly. Nael, who seemed in a deep trance, opened her eyes. Yes, I was just thinking, she said. If Mom's intuition is right, and I am indeed a soul mage, then maybe I can help Mech, if I can find his soul. Whoa, Garrett whispered. That would be so cool. Is that what you're trying to do? Aidan asked. No, Nael laughed. I don't know what I'm doing. Right now, I'm trying to recall the instructions that Zacharias left behind for, I think, someone like me to find and figure out how to make use of them. Like, can I even perceive what a soul sounds like at all? Any luck? Not yet. But in the meantime, I'm learning that everything really does have a sound, even stuff that's supposedly dead. Like, and here she raised her eyes meaningfully towards her brother and touched the bench. This. Yes, I hear it loud and clear. It's saying, tell her it's naughty to listen in without asking permission, Aidan grinned. Garrett snorted. But seriously, yes, I always thought that wood could speak to me because it has, well, a soul in a way. But I never really thought about why I could hear it. Does that make sense? It always felt like everyone could, if they only listened closely enough. Niall thought for a moment. I can hear it, but I can't understand what it says. To me, it's just a unique sound wave. You can have a conversation with it. So maybe it's a different kind of soul magic? I don't think so, Aidan laughed. The whole idea of guiding someone to some manifest destiny freaks me out, sister. Solace emerged from the tube. For a long moment, her heart stopped and she forgot to breathe. Stretching below her was the crystal. Her first thought was that it looked like a massive volcanic stone that shone with the color of magic. Straining her eyes, she could see in the distance the crystal's contours. She struggled internally to stop from revoking the air bubble, just so she could catch a sniff. From this distance, the crystal surface was perfectly smooth without variation. Staring at it, Solace could not shake the feeling that it moved and realized that the crystal was not entirely material. It was made of something that existed beyond the physical realm. Closing her eyes, she tried to sense just how far and how deeply it extended, but the feeling that came back frightened her, and she stopped. It was immeasurably, impossibly huge. She desperately longed to touch it. Solace recalled the six-sided room from her dream, but instead of a jigsaw puzzle, in front of her she now saw the crystal, growing ever closer as she swam. The images that were in the solution to the puzzle were now swirling lazily inside the crystal, and all she needed to do was to touch it, and she could finally see them clearly. Her hand reached out, and she knew that in just a few seconds, everything would finally make sense. She sank further. The crystal's massive size made the rest of the world dissolve, and she forgot where she was. She found herself calmer and more in harmony than ever before in her life. She knew her purpose, and it was simple: to make contact. She got ready to let her protective air bubble dissipate. Her heart beat faster. Closing her eyes, she extended her fingers as far as she could and smiled. She was finally at peace. "Oh," Nael exclaimed suddenly. Aidan and Garrett looked up in anticipation. "Figure something out?" Aidan asked. "Yes, I sure did," she said. "I'm super hungry. When are we stopping for camp?" A couple of seconds passed in awkward silence, and then they burst out laughing. "We're almost there," Garrett said after catching his breath. "Here, have an apple." Solace's hand almost reached the surface of the crystal. She opened her eyes and took a deep breath, then revoked her air bubble. She wouldn't need it anymore. Smiling as she sank slowly, she let the field of magic extend to her and engulf her. Then, out of nowhere, something changed. How rude, she thought as she froze right above the crystal. The magic that only a second before felt so soft and so comforting suddenly grew cold, colder than anything she'd ever felt. Annoyed, she tried to move but couldn't. The truth dawned on her. She had been assessed and found lacking. An overwhelming sense of disappointment and rejection filled her entire being. "I need to be here. I want the answer," she tried to scream, but her mouth filled with water, and the pressure of being so deep below the surface suddenly became very real. Solace started choking. She was drowning in place, and her mind was filled with terror. The last thing she remembered before her lungs collapsed was being punched in the gut by Lormek. Then she blacked out. "After we cross tomorrow, we're going to split from the wagons," Enriel sat back. "I would rather enter the city somewhat more incognito than via the major caravan routes. They might still be looking for you." "Yeah, I'm curious about that," Nael said. "When we left, Grinta said we were in danger, but she didn't tell us why. Do you know?" Enriel looked at her for a moment, then sighed. "I suppose it won't hurt to tell you at this point." She gestured for them to lean in closer. "The guards will respect our privacy, but just in case." Some time ago, a series of reports started coming in about 3 individuals in the shallows, each with a rare, even mystical ability. A wild mage, a sound shaper, and a wood speaker. You might recognize these unusual people, she grinned. "Heck, one of them sounded so much like you, Nai, that I went down to check whether it was you. I knew you had died a long time ago, but a small part of me really wanted to believe that maybe, impossibly, you somehow survived. Unfortunately, I was caught in a big storm, lost my way in the inner shallows, and if your friend Lormek hadn't found me, I might not have survived that day." "Wait, it was you who invited Lormek?" Aidan asked. Enriel nodded. "Well, not directly, but the invitation came from me." "But Mom, why would you be afraid of in the tunnels? That's not like you, at all," Nael added. Enriel sighed deeply, and her face hardened. "It doesn't matter why, I'm not proud of it. Let us talk no more about it," she said firmly, and the others exchanged a glance. Something happened, they shared a thought. Something important. "Anyway, it didn't take many reports for the guild to decide to follow you, and the task fell to me. So I assigned one of my unofficial charges, a military man by the name of Darren, to set it up." Nael jumped to her feet. "Darren?" she exclaimed. Her mother gestured for her to stay quiet and to sit down. "Yes, Darren. Why, do you know him?" she asked. "Oh, do I now?" Nael quipped. "He came to me for years." And as Aidan and Garrett gave her a questioning look, she added, "Yes, you're exactly right, for that. It was a good way to make a living. And I liked him. He was a simple man, but earnest and sweet, and he loved my lullabies, even though I never shaped them for him. He offered to marry me at some point, she chuckled. Henrielle raised her eyebrow at this. The apple certainly did not fall far from the tree, she remarked, before continuing her story. Darren told me he appointed some fella to deal with it and assured me that it was handled and that this guy had made contact with the four of you, the three the guild wanted to keep a watch over, and Lormek, to whom I decided to pay a debt of gratitude with the offer of employment. Darren also said that we had an agent embedded within the group. She turned to Garrett. Presumably that was you? Garrett shifted uncomfortably. Aidan patted him on the back. It's okay, bud. We were there, he said, and Garrett smiled at him, visibly relieved. It was otherwise a low-level matter, so I set it aside, Henrielle resumed. That must have been Brad, Aidan said. Mom, do you remember the name of the guy Darren hired by any chance? Henrielle paused. Yes, his name was Hortus. Brad is Hortus, Aidan murmured. Go on. Well, what I didn't know, what nobody knew, was that this Hortus fellow was actually secretly working to undermine the guild. And he did it under secret instructions from, here Henrielle lowered her voice to a whisper, the Frontenga family. They stared at her. Wait a second. Aren't you married to Albergino Frontenga, as in the Frontenga family? Garrett finally asked. Henrielle nodded. Indeed, I had no idea that my dear husband and his family were involved in this conspiracy until very recently. Gino's grandfather, Aurelius, the Grand Patriarch, is an old-time friend of King Emeka. This is how Gino's brother Bernelius ended up as her pope. The Frontengas don't give a rat's ass which religion runs supreme, but Emeka has an agenda. Ever since she assumed the throne, she has been carefully working to weaken the hold of the church on Corinthian politics, especially when it comes to trade and economics. Which church? Aidan asked. Freyg, of course, the biggest. The real reason Emeka was able to claim the throne is that the trading houses have kind of had it with the church, which they see as a force that keeps economic development at bay. She has been very loyal to her mission, and so she remains king. The church has tried many times to remove her without success. She has many powerful allies. The church has historically been the dominant force in pushing for Corantha to annex Lavatown, ever since King Anberg lost the Battle of Stonebridge. Emeka is the first king to change the narrative and treat Lavatown as an important ally, and more critically, to really reach out to the Sentia. It has worked well for everyone except for the church, because it means their power is waning, and with that, so does their wealth. You can see it on the streets of Corantha City, where people are openly displaying symbols of many faiths, in particular followers of Thor, and Riel smiled broadly. The Frontengas were all too happy to support Emeka in her mission, but Aurelius also saw this as an opportunity to realize his own secret wish by weakening the Thieves Guild in Lavatown. In his figuring, if the Frontengas could wrest some of the guild's control over the inner workings of Lavatown's hierarchy, then the Frontrunners could become the leading trading house in the Rhone, maybe even rival Emeka's own Rocky Road company. Sounds complicated. So how do we figure into all this? Aidan asked. In truth, Nylian, you don't. You're just innocent bystanders. When Hortus was tasked with watching you, it was inconvenient for him. So he aimed to get rid of you. I don't know the details, but I was informed by Darren, after he caught wind of the conspiracy, that Hortus tried sending you on several fool's errands, like breaking into Gino's office, so that you could implicate yourselves in some crime, have a show trial, and he wouldn't have to deal with you anymore. Darren said that instead of doing the decent thing from Hortus's perspective and getting caught like you were supposed to, you kept beating the odds. Hortus was working directly with my husband. That's why Gina turned to his brother Bernelius to see if Bernelius could deal with you when you went to the capital. And that's how some of you finally got arrested. My guess is your friend Grinta caught wind of it and tried to warn you, but it was too late. Henrielle paused. Is Darren okay? I should like to see him, Niall asked. He is and he isn't, Henrielle responded. That's why I came down to see Bavin. After I relayed the plot to the Prime, he sent a group down to teach Hortus a lesson. Seems like Hortus barely managed to escape, but the room that covers the entrance to the prison was destroyed. That room meant a lot to Bavin, and he has been demanding compensation and holding a fair amount of guild storage at his inn hostage until he gets paid. The guild thinks he's asking for too much. Darren went down to beat some sense into him, but Henrielle was clearly enjoying this part of the tale. Good old Bavin is much more capable than any old dwarf has any right to be, and Darren got himself captured instead. I came down to try and negotiate his release. Bavin has tacked on a fairly sizable ransom and, as he told me, insult fees. How much are we talking about? Garrett asked. At this point, it's up to 20,000 gold, Enriel responded casually. Garrett whistled. That's a lot, like a lot. Enriel nodded. It is, but in truth, the guild is very rich and can well afford it, and my recommendation to Prime is that they do, because I know Bavin well, and he's not likely to budge. So they would have to kill him instead. They might still do that, damn the consequences, and it is exactly what I was trying to get him to understand, but like I said, he can be stubborn. Consequences, Garrett asked? Yes, killing Bavin will likely lead to a reshuffling of Labatan's power hierarchy. He's much more than an innkeeper and a whoremaster, Enriel responded calmly, which is why I think cooler heads will prevail. That's way over my head, Nael sighed. What about your husband and the Frentingas? She asked. Enriel smiled. Oh, I'm pretty sure Prime and Aurelius will reach some honorable agreement. My guess is Bavin will get his money, but it will come from more than just the guild. Gino is likely to be exiled from Labatan for a while. I honestly don't mind. He needs a good long break. As for me, I find all this invigorating. Reminds me of how much I used to love adventuring. So I hope you don't mind if I hang with you all for a while, Enriel concluded. Mind? Nael cried as she hugged her mother. It's the best thing in the world.
This isn't it, but when they were in Francesco Cesco, whatever the guy's name.
Oh, Virgino Frentinga.
That guy. In his office, that's when they stole the picture
The picture, correct.
of Niall's mom. I forget, please remind me, did she see some like recognition in that picture at that time?
No, the only one who saw the picture at that time was Lomek. Then Lomek shared the picture with Garrett and on the at the fire.
Okay.
Right? But eventually Nael got to see it when they came back and said when Lomek showed it to his father after the other three got arrested. And then she was like, can I see it too? And that's when she saw her mother.
And she recognized then.
At that point, yeah, she recognized her mother. Yes.
Yeah.
Early chapters. There's one place where we talk about crystals. Very first chapter, Spark.
Yeah, that was my question. The gods put the big crystal. It's under the water and it's plugging something.
It's plugging the magma on the moon, right? It's basically keeping right.
That okay. All right.
But you can probably at that point assume that the crystal is the crystal from Spark, and right, you see the connecting tissue starting to happen.
Well, that's how ships fly.
Yeah.
It's still on I don't know.
So what she was basically saying is that there's an ability to create steel with the crystal, but the moment that steel is created, the crystal repels it. So it has like an anti-magnetic effect, like it's pushing it away.
Okay.
And so the ships, those flying boxes, they're basically boxes that are made with sufficient amount of steel to carry the weight of a ship by being floated, by being rejected away from the crystal.
I didn't. And now I get it.
It's basically magnetism, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Magical magnetism,
Yeah.
rather than something more complicated. But because they wanted it to sound complicated, they created a cult to manage these things, right? They literally implemented a cult.
Convince them they matter.
Right. Which, the Maritime Guild is a cult created specifically for the purpose of hiding the reality of what's happening with the crystal and steel.
Okay.
They prefer religion.
We like cults. Cults are awesome. All right, shall we go?
Love the bird masks.
Do it.
Act 2, chapter 24. Third time's no charm. Interlude. The last dream. Solace lies on the beach. The sun feels nice on her face, but she cannot open her eyes. She can't breathe either. Oh, right, I drowned. The thought amuses her and she chuckles. She recalls the very last moment of being alive. That boy definitely packs a punch, she muses. Then she remembers where she was and frowns. I got so close. I have to find a way back there. She nods vigorously and tries to get up. Oh, Solace realizes that she can't move. She considers the irony of that moment and then recalls that she was never very good with ironies. Then the crystal comes back into view. The pain is instant, severe, and she feels it all over her body. She tries to calm herself by breathing, remembers that she can't do that, and then just thinks about breathing instead, which feels awkward, but still somehow calms her down. She thinks back to that last moment. The crystal is beautiful and flawless, and it stretches forever. Tears fill her eyes, or at least they should. Then she notices movement under the surface of the crystal. It's fast, like a whirlwind, but bigger, like a tempest. No, she thought, the thought pops to her mind, like a vortex. It appears to be made of two intertwined parts chasing each other endlessly. The closer she gets, the more the crystal comes into view. The vortex is constant and powerful, and the more she looks at it, the faster and more ferocious it seems to become. If it goes on like this, the crystal will break, and she suddenly realizes, and her thoughts shift. Solace finds herself staring into a dark void. Extending from below her is a rope. No, not a rope, something else that looks like a rope, but is made of energy and dark matter and antimatter. I don't even know what those words mean, she mutters to herself in confusion. Behind her, she sees the crystal. Then she begins gliding quietly on the rope, slowly at first, and the crystal shrinks behind her, and she's floating out of Lava Town. As her speed rises, she sees it from above for a brief moment. Then it too disappears from view, and she sees the entire world. She looks around her and sees the sun and the moons, Kuri and Ani. She is accelerating so rapidly that soon everything around her becomes blurry, little dots of bright light becoming streaks. She feels herself flying through things, hot and cold and large and small. Some of them are so big that she is convinced they are entire worlds. Then she slows down abruptly. She is almost at the end of the rope, and there is a blue and white world, a little bigger than Korantha ahead of her. As she descends, she is taken in awe. It is beautiful, with several large land masses amongst huge blue oceans and snowy mountain peaks towering so high that they make Lava Town's volcano look puny. As she gets nearer, she perceives that this world is full of people and structures and many things that move around quickly on the ground and in the air. Her mind tries to make sense of all of the strange things around her and finds comfort in several bridges. One of them looks a little like Stonebridge, but at an immense scale. It stretches for miles and miles, glinting white in the sunlight, connecting a small island with a much bigger landmass, and continuing on the other side to a peninsula, like Lava Town's. The city at the end of the bridge shows the tops of extremely tall buildings. From above, some of them are surrounded by clouds and seem like they are floating amongst them. Naya would love to see this, she recalls her friend's obsession with some library in the sky. But the bridge isn't made of rock and diamond and jade. It is made of metal, and here she pauses for a second as her mind attempts to decipher her reality until the term finally comes to her. Liquid stone, just like the tall buildings. One of them has a large eye on top. The eye is staring at her. Her consciousness snaps back to the crystal. Her fingers are about to touch it. For the first time, she notices the crack. It's not a big crack, perhaps a foot long, but she somehow knows that the crack is extremely important, and it definitely shouldn't be there. Her eyes focus, and her heart races with alarm. The vortex inside the crystal is causing the crack to grow. Then the crack shifts, and it spells out a word, and Solace crumbles, her entire being swallowed by the word. It shines in a fashion so heinous, so damning, that her very existence is negated by its very presence, and she knows it has to be true. Fill it to the core of her soul. Shame. And so when Lomek appears to punch her lights out, she smiles. It's only what she deserves. They woke up before dawn, and Enriel let the captain know that they would walk the rest of the way. Then they peeled off and headed towards the south gates. There was no road around the city, so they made their way through the woods. It was still early morning when they reached the forest clearing and sat down to have a quick bite. Last time we left the main road, we almost died, Niall said uncomfortably as they were getting ready to pack up. Enriel smiled. Very unlucky. Surely there are plenty of wild animals, but being attacked by a werewolf is very rare, especially this close to the city. If you go south a ways towards the equator, then it becomes far more dangerous. How does that phrase go? Garrett asked suddenly. About lightning striking twice? They looked at him, then followed his outstretched hand. At the edge of the clearing stood a werewolf. Its eyes were examining them carefully, and it shook its head slowly, causing the hairs on its back to move like a halo. It raised one of its massive paws towards them. Is that what I think it is? Garrett whispered in awe. Yes, Enriel replied as she jumped to her feet. Do you guys have silver blades? She asked out of the side of her mouth. They looked at each other. Lomek and I talked about getting them after the last attack, but never got the chance, Nael said. Guys, it's the same one. Aidan let his sword fall to the ground. He was trembling. They took my bow and silver-tipped arrows when they arrested us. So what do we do now? Enriel pulled out a long silver dagger. Hide in a tree. Then she turned to the wolf. Last time we met, friend, I was severely injured. It won't be so easy this time. She twisted her dagger this way and that. In her other hand, she held a talisman. It was growing faintly. Garrett bolted towards a large oak, but the rest of them didn't move. They seemed compelled to watch the scene. The werewolf growled. Then, in a kind of accent that an animal that had never spoken any language, it pointed at Aidan and said, "Cub. Go already. Why are you standing there?" Enriel hissed at them. Nael edged towards the edge of the clearing and closed her eyes. She was sensing the vibrations all around her, of the sun and the foliage and the ground and the many little critters running away as Garrett scrambled up the tree as high as he could. The soundscape became visible in her mind. Her eyes still closed, Nael could see Enriel's heart beating calmly, steadily, and the tautness of her muscles as they were getting ready to spring into action. She envisioned Aidan and knew that he was frozen in fear. His heartbeat was so fast that it might stop, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. His muscles were whining faintly, as if about to shut down. The talisman word coming off to Nael's content, almost disinterested. That was odd. Diving into the sound, she realized that the talisman perceived little danger and trusted its bearer. Nael wondered how a talisman could think. Then, still in sound vision, she looked at the werewolf. It made a deep, predatory growl. She saw the sound clearly, and it was so much more. It was a rich and complex rumble, deadly and beautiful. It told her the pain of defeat, of escaped prey, of an incredible disappointment. It communicated the abiding hurt of traumatic loss and of a hatred forged in decades of memories. It told of a desire, a longing so deep and so lasting that it verged on insanity. She suddenly realized that it was directed at the talisman. She opened her eyes in shock. I found her this morning. She flushed out to shore, I guess. Maybe a ship went astray and fell prey to the rocks, but she's still breathing. Solace could feel someone lift her up gently and carry her away. She tried to speak, but couldn't muster enough strength. Even opening her eyes was too Herculean a task, so she just concentrated on breathing. "Thank you for coming to get me. I know this woman," she heard another voice coming from her carrier. It was a safe voice, one that she knew from somewhere, and it made her happy. Then she blacked out again. The talisman shone in a faint white light, much weaker than the one Nael remembered from their previous encounter. She tried to concentrate on creating another sound fist with which to punch the werewolf, but found that she was too distracted by the richness of her sound vision. Frustrated, she took several deep breaths and tried to focus. "Begone, beast!" Enriel shouted at the werewolf. She moved rapidly, her dagger making rapid, incisive movements through the air, and she held the talisman forward. The werewolf leapt. His direction took Enriel by surprise, and she misjudged his trajectory. Instead of jumping at her, he had aimed at the talisman she was holding. Its powerful jaws closed on it, and his momentum took him away, tearing the dagger out from Enriel's hand. He screamed in terrible agony as he landed, and Nael's concentration broke again as she found herself feeling sorry for the poor creature. The werewolf stood shakily on his feet. Light smoke was coming from the wound where the dagger had lodged. It was clearly burning him from the inside. But the huge creature's eyes spoke of a determination that would not be easily overcome. The talisman shone brightly now, even as most of its light was contained inside the werewolf's mouth. They could all see his neck muscles bulging hideously as he slowly, painfully tightened his jaw with an immense effort, its human-like eyes filling with tears. Then they all heard a sharp crack. The light stopped shining, and the werewolf, breathing heavily, opened his jaw and let the dull pieces of the talisman fall slowly to the ground in front of him. The sound of the talisman breaking finally snapped Nael into focus. It was a sound like she had never heard before, not just the physical sound of snapping metal, but the sound of magic and a power beyond the material, at the very edge of existence. Something that she knew now was real, but never before knew how to hear. It was the sound of a soul. "I'm so sorry, brother," Nael said. She knew exactly what she needed to do. Solis found herself laying in a meadow. It was a perfect day, sunny but not too warm, with a few clouds floating overhead. The grass underneath her felt comfortable and inviting, and everything smelled crisp and wonderful. Sheep were grazing nearby, and their coat was so perfect and so soft that she couldn't help but reach out to touch one of them. It felt nicer than anything she could imagine, and she grunted in satisfaction. Then she felt something against her skin and looked down to see a sweet ladybug crawling lazily. The ladybug looked up at her. "You are going to be fine," the ladybug said, and Solis smiled happily. "Drink some of this." Solis opened her eyes. The ladybug dissolved into Rajiv's face. He was sitting next to her, holding a steaming cup to her lips. His touch was gentle, and his eyes were caring and kind. "Oh, good, you're awake. This will help you feel better. You're almost drowned." Sighing, the memory of the beautiful meadow fresh in her mind, she took a sip. It tasted bland. Nael, her eyes shut tightly, grabbed onto the soul of the powerful trinket. It was afraid, alone, and confused. It was made with a singular purpose, and now that it no longer had one, it had nowhere to go and no reason to exist. By following its resonance, she found the trembling anchor of the little spirit and started guiding it across the clearing towards Aiden. Aiden's soul was sitting still. He was frozen, fear of the werewolf overwhelming him, and she saw it through the scar on his face. But the sound that came through had another quality to it, a quality that perfectly matched the one that she was guiding. She brought Aiden's frightened soul and the talisman's lost one together. It took but a split second, and the souls merged. Nael opened her eyes. Enriel had started to circle the werewolf, aiming to grab a hold of the dagger stuck in his side. The werewolf was circling as well, preparing to strike, secure in the knowledge that there were no more weapons that could hurt him. Then everyone stopped and looked at Aiden. He transformed right before their eyes. One moment he was standing there frozen. Then he was surrounded by a white aura, which grew brighter and less transparent, hiding his body. A moment later, the aura dissipated, and standing there, instead of Aiden, was another werewolf, a slightly smaller one. The new werewolf had a visible scar running down the left side of its face, and he was grinning. Then it spoke in Aiden's voice. "Step back, everyone. I'll take care of him." Getting up on her elbow, Solis saw Lormic in another bed. "Is he all right?" she asked Rajiv. He shook his head. "Physically, yes, and I can keep him alive for a long time even if he doesn't wake up, but something is bothering him, and it leaves him unconscious." "Let me try," Solis said, and walked slowly across the room. "Hey there, buddy, are you all right?" she asked. Lormic moaned. She squeezed his hand. Lomic's eyes flew open. He jerked his hand back and scrambled away, pressing himself against the corner, babbling incoherently, his eyes full of fear. Rajiv came over quickly. "At least he's up," he said, then pulled Solis away gently but firmly. Lomic calmed down a bit. "Better you stay away from him until we figure out what's going on." Wolf Aiden stood over the big werewolf's lifeless body. Then he reached down with his mouth and slowly but carefully pulled out the silver dagger. He winced at the base as the base of the blade touched his lip and hastily dropped it to the ground. "I believe this is yours," he said, looking at Enriel. "Boy, the silver really does burn," he added. Nael ran and hugged him deeply, burying her face in his mane. "I'm so sorry, Aiden. I had no choice," she cried. "It's all right, sister," Aiden said. "I kind of like it, honestly, and if you hadn't done it, I think we would all have died." Garrett climbed down from the tree. "Can someone explain to me what the hell just happened?"
Me too.
Nael stood up and pointed at the dead werewolf. "When he broke the talisman, I could hear it," she said. "It was different than anything else in the world." She looked at her mother and smiled. "But because you told me about soul magic, and I've been thinking about all the stuff in Zacharias' book, I intuitively understood that the talisman had a soul." "Whoa," Garrett whispered. "Really? An object with a soul?" Nael nodded. "A very limited one, with an explicit purpose. Zacharias had a term for it. He called it a soul spark. I didn't understand what he meant by that, but I do now." "Oh, Talus," Enriel murmured softly. "What did you do?" "Anyway, when it broke, I guess its purpose ended, and it was going to dissipate. But at that moment, I heard Aiden's soul scream through his scar, and I realized that they resonated with each other perfectly. So I did the first thing that came to mind. I brought them together. It made them both happy," she said. "It shone," Garrett exclaimed. "I saw it. His scar shone right when the thing broke." Nael shrugged her shoulders. I really don't have a good way to explain it, but it seems like when they joined, the talisman soul confirmed the form of its power in the context of its freshest experience on Aiden, which I guess is why he became a werewolf. But because I was who I was first, I carry all of my memories into my wolf form, just like Carrot, Aiden said. Enriel stepped forward. Sounds right, and I do believe that this is the very same werewolf that attacked me when you were born, Nilian. Looks like it carried a grudge for all these years. I'm glad it's over. Let's get moving though. For what it's worth, we have a much better chance of getting into the city with a pet wolf at the southern gate.
Okay, why did we miss how the werewolf got killed?
How the werewolf what?
Got killed.
Aiden says, I'll take care of him. And then when we come back to the scene, he's taking care of him.
Okay.
It's, it's basically Aiden killed him.
I feel robbed.
I'm so
We
sorry.
wanted-
But they built up the bad werewolf. I wanted to see him die,
Yeah.
or I wanted to hear him die. I wanted to hear like he got vanquished.
Well, we did say that, right? But
You did.
He said
you
it,
did.
but we
did.
didn't get to.
But I would have been okay with a battle scene.
with a C. Okay, that's fine. I can
Did
add
you
it.
ever read A Cat Who Walks Through Walls by Robert
Maybe that's
Heinlein?
for the screenplay, we understand.
It felt to me like it wasn't necessary,
Yeah.
but if it's necessary, then I can add it.
He's such a big character,
I feel like it's necessary.
even though he's not a main character. It's cool.
Well, I mean, it's the third time they're facing him in some
Yeah.
form, right?
Yeah.
First time he's in the werewolf
You
champ.
built him up.
Yeah,
By the way, that's why it's called third time's no
He
charm.
needed his
Yeah.
ass kicked.
I will agree that not actually experiencing the end of the werewolf that does leave me wanting.
Okay, yeah, that's a scene I can add easily.
You ever seen Air Force One?
Yeah.
If Gary Oldman had just like floated off the back of the plane, it wouldn't have been as powerful what actually happened.
You ever seen eight snakes?
Fair enough. But otherwise,
Yeah, one of the cool things was how you tied in the
didn't
wood
see it
has a
coming.
soul.
Mhm.
And it would have been, for me anyway, because that resonates, it's like to have more of that in the story so far, but.
well, I can't have it more in the story so far because she's only discovering this stuff now.
That's true, that's true.
Right, I mean, this is like Niall is discovering something completely like mind-blowing that she's never known before.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. I like that.
But there's so many things that are now reshaping the story, right? I mean, when you take
Right.
all of this back and you're like, oh,
Yes, question,
yes,
why did Lomac punch,
we will find out.
That's the one I don't know yet.
seriously?
Well, we don't actually know what happened to Solace yet.
yeah, she's in
Well,
another.
she got saved.
Are you
Now she-
sure?
And understand that it's not actually Lomac punching her.
it's
She's
right.
imagining
Yeah,
Lomac punching her,
I see,
out, right?
I see.
That's where I went with it.
I'm kind of thinking, yeah.
Yeah,
Just like Lomac is imagining,
she might have
breaking
said,
her
yeah,
neck,
sure.
or like there's an interplay between these two in their minds and their psyches,
Almost like it's the same person.
or something is going on between them, right? Which next time, in a week and a half, we'll understand all of those things.
Damn it, next chapter.
The next 4 chapters will complete the unraveling of these mysteries.
So is this the end of part 2 or?
The next reading is the end of Act 2.
Right, and then the last one.
And the last one is all of Act 3 in one shot,
Yes.
and that one will have the resolution of the story and perhaps another twist.
Be ready to party.
Champagne and whiskey for everybody.
And I hope
Bring
you
out
enjoy.
all
I
the
hope you
PCPs
enjoy it as much as I
today.
think you're going to enjoy it, because when we get to that final bit and you see what's actually is going on, which you still don't.
No, but there are things that you're tying back in
Yeah.
to stuff before in a really cool way.
Well, now remember I told you
Pieces
about
are coming
coloring the
together.
strands, right? I
Yeah.
put the tapestry out in the
Yeah.
beginning,
Oh, yeah.
right?
The
You
pieces are
reminded
coming
me.
together.
And now I'm like coloring the strands between them, so you can see how werewolf ties to Enriel and to Aiden, which ties to Nael. Like you now see how all of these disparate chapters are tied to each other in some way. We're still missing some ties, so there's some strands you still haven't
That's coming next.
heard. Like you clearly there's Solace has visited the crystal, which is something that we know exists from Spark, but we haven't seen the connections. The connective tissue isn't there yet, right? We don't know what's happening. It's not entirely like there's two pairs of chapters that are not tied. We don't know what Horror is about, and we don't know what Spark is about, but we do know that they're there, and we start to see a little bit into Spark, right? There's a little bit of but there's still a little bit of fog of war that I've maintained. But most of the strands are now colored, right? We're gonna have a whole bunch of the rest of them getting colored in the next 4 chapters.
It definitely evoked the the ending 10 minutes of 2001 with Solis's, like she's going picking up speed and things that were light are now streaks, because that means you're going faster than light. And you know that, and then she gets to this meadow place.
Well, did you like San Francisco? The Salesforce
I
tower?
heard it. That's
The
what I thought it
Salesforce
was.
tower with the eye,
The minute you said the eye, I was like, keep talking about the Salesforce Tower.
the Bay Bridge and the Salesforce tower?
Didn't get it.
Yeah,
I missed
I
that.
missed it. But now that you
Yeah,
said it,
because Salesforce tower sometimes puts the eye of Sauron on right
Yep.
during Halloween,
Yep.
right?
I didn't know they did that, and I can see it from my house.
Yeah, no, it's like one of the coolest things they do. So that's the reference. The reference is the
When they were building it,
It
it
really
had
looked
2
like-
cranes on the top, and then it really looked like it.
It really did look
Yeah.
great.
yeah. So that was the reference. It's a reference. She basically comes and sees San Francisco in her mind for a very short while.
Yeah.
But of course she doesn't know anything about like Earth, right? Or definitely not modern Earth. So it's like through her mind of this person from this world that's somewhere else that's somehow connected energetically to Earth. There's another interesting tidbit that I tossed in there that you probably caught, which is that the crystal is a very dense material that has the energy of a sun that should hint towards what the potential outcome could be if something goes really wrong with it. Because we do know science in our modern world, even though they don't.
Yeah, well, that makes me think of black holes.
Uh-huh.
And
What
the
could happen if
similarity.
something like that
Yeah.
gets disturbed sufficiently and nudged across the threshold?
Well, and you, for the first time, brought into play like 3, or yeah, it was 3, but I only remember 2. What the strand was made of that she saw, dark matter, antimatter, and something else. And I was like, oh, we're talking dark matter already.
And she doesn't know what it means, but the words occur to her, right?
Yeah.
Which also echoes some other things. Like if you remember when Lomek gets his calling from Thor, he speaks in a language he doesn't understand. So it's a lot of things that are I'm tying back and coloring the strands back to what happened early in the story. If you were reading the book, you would probably now be going back and finding all these references, right? Yeah, where are all these references? Because there's a lot. These last 2 chapters are referring to so many things, so many hopes that were planted earlier.
Yeah, you are.
Does it feel satisfying? Because that was what I was really like,
For the
Hopefully,
most
yes.
part, we already told you about the.
yeah,
werewolf.
I can add that scene in the book. That's easy.
Yeah, he needs his ass kicked. So.
Yeah, we want to see it happen.
You want to see it happen?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. That's fine. That's a paragraph. That's not a big deal. Yeah.
But good has to triumph over evil, or else we're unsettled.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, for me it was like, Aidan became a werewolf is the important part.
Yeah, and I didn't get that until it was like, Niall just saying, well, I don't know how it happened, but the talisman and you and werewolf and energy, you became a werewolf. The scar is what tied it in, right? Because it was still him.
Yep.
But he was smaller.
Yeah, because he's a smaller. He didn't start like the other werewolf, the one that's now dead finally.
Yeah.
The one from the werewolf was originally a wolf and a large one, and then became a werewolf, which made it even larger.
Yeah.
Aidan was not that big of a
So
guy.
that makes, in my mind, even more of a question about how the smaller werewolf kick ass on the larger.
Because the larger werewolf was deeply injured. It had
He
a
was
silver
already-
dagger stuck in his side.
Yes, he's scrappy.
Right. So
Fiery.
Also has the energy of a talisman.
we're gonna revisit this because there's of course he became a werewolf in a different way. Remember, we just discussed about the mechanics of becoming a were creature. You have to be bit by a dire creature.
I wasn't.
Werewolves, the Aidan did not do that. Aidan somehow became a werewolf through the impact of this talisman. So
But he has the soul of it. I mean, according to what you're saying, I mean, the way I understood it, he has the soul of a talisman, which means he
Correct.
has all the power.
The soul spark of the talisman is now being merged with Aiden's original soul,
Right. And
which
it is
perhaps has other meanings, which we might discover.
Yes,
Or might not.
because he's also incredibly powerful.
Oh, I don't,
Right.
I gotta tell you, if you say something, if you introduce something in chapter 1, then you better solve it in act 3. Like you can't,
Sure.
like, that's literally like, if you don't do that, then you have violated some of the basic literary function,
Yeah.
right? You're not allowed to introduce something like, even if I just closed the whole like library in the sky thing with that throwaway comment, right? At least now we know what Nael was talking about, the library in the sky, because clearly Zacharias apparently visited some high rises on Earth, and that's what he interpreted them to look like, right?
Yeah.
But you need the explanation. Otherwise, why did I mention that in the Nael chapter? Like, I have to tie this up.
Do the people in TV land have any comments? Because we've monopolized.
Well said.
Great timing.
Well said.
And do you too?
That's funny. My dogs
You
just
did.
decided to chime in. So first of all, again, wow. But secondly, wow, because of the world. But I was reflecting back on when you were talking a few readings ago about the research you do. You were discussing building bridges. As your example, you go to this inane level of detail to understand building of bridges. And as I was listening to the action in this last chapter in particular, I was just thinking about all the detail again, the mechanics of it, for how it had to happen with the silver and whatnot. It's just excellent. It's so believable. It transports you, despite it being fantasy, that you're just all disbelief is suspended, just riding along, right there with you. No speed bumps at all. I'm just right there.
Oh, thank you. I actually have tears now.
No. Yeah.
Thanks, Rich. That was a lovely comment.
Yeah.
I try really, really hard to make sure that there's no logic inconsistencies in what I write. Right? And that's can get tough when I'm building such a complex.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm. The work is there.
But what matters, it's like what they always say about science fiction and fantasy in particular. It doesn't have to be like it doesn't have to follow the laws of physics. It just has to follow its own laws all the way, right? Yeah, it has to be internally consistent. It doesn't have to, to work outside of it. But if you break your own consistency, then the
Credibility goes away.
entire scaffolding collapses, right? And that's the hardest bit to make sure. And I can't tell you how much time I've spent going back and forth and, to me, in my mind, meticulously making sure that every detail that I am including that is not obvious is backed up by something else. So all of these things interlock together and they make sense together, even if they don't make sense like individually, right? They all work with each other.
Yeah.
I've probably spent 30 or 40 hours just doing that throughout the story.
It's especially critical when you're modifying traditional lore and making your own expansion, right? And which is what you're doing, which is great. But there's no logic inconsistencies. And I gotta tell you, I do that all day long as I evaluate products, security products, things. I do it all day long, and I'm just riding this wave because it's a perfect wave. It really is.
Well, thank you. I mean, I can tell you one of the hardest things to make sure did not collapse under its own weight is the conspiracy. Think about how many elements go into that and how critical this conspiracy is to the story without ever being mentioned until it's finally mentioned.
Yeah, nearly the end of Act 2.
There's so many little places where this could have fallen apart. I can't tell you how many things I caught as I was trying to write it. I'm like, oh shit, well, if he knows Hanan, then that doesn't work, right? I needed to find a reason for Enriel to somehow be married to this guy, even though he's a person that she would normally, right? You know, so it's not just that he's a human and short-lived. It's also that she's kind of a little bit emotionally attached for whatever. I mean, there's a lot of little things that would not have made sense. But you know, it had to be explained. So now you know how come these guys went to Quaranta City and they apparently knew about them before they got there, right? It's because of this thing, right? But it all has to tie together and not fall apart.
Yeah, you're doing that well.
And that's been the hardest thing to do. I am hoping that you have the same feeling when we get to the end of the story, because that's when everything gets reevaluated.
Right.
And the scaffolding you see now suddenly is going to be replaced by something much larger. That's the one foreshadowing I'll give you.
Yeah, you're doing well, and I like the process. Thanks again. for
Well,
that.
thank you.
Let
You
me
guys
be
are
part of it.
you know, and that was such a lovely comment, Rich, so thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of neat to see things coming together.
All right, who's doing the outro?
You know, Barak, I was going to say that it's like you're in a dream, and the dream becomes more complex as the night progresses. And then, you know, as the tail end of the morning, you're approaching the tail end of the dream, another new twist comes in, and you want to keep watching the dream, but your eyes are opening up. It's something like that. I don't know how to explain it, but
Yeah. Like
I
you're
like
waking
it.
up, but you want to keep going back in and getting more.
I like it. I like that. Thank you. That's a really lovely comment as well. If you manage to evoke a sense of being in a waking dream, that's the dream for me, right? As the person who's delivering this story. Anyhow, will you join us for that?
And that was another episode of 5. Thank you, Barak, for reading that. And if you liked what you heard today, please subscribe and like this video, and join us next week for another installment. Ta-ta.